Okay. When we're using the quadratic formula, the equation has to be equal to 0. So that's one of the challenges on this worksheet. You had to move things so that it was all equal to 0. Another way of thinking of it is that everything needs to be on one side of the equation. So all this stuff here needs to be on this side of the equation. Okay. Now, some people were asking me, instead of moving the 3 minus p to the other side, they said, can we move the 4p squared over? Now, it is not incorrect to do that, like to end up with 0 equals negative 4p squared plus 3 minus p. That's not incorrect, but I don't want you to do it like that. And the reason is that later, after we finish with the quadratic formula, we're going to solve these equations by factoring. And if we have a negative number in the beginning, it's going to make everything very confusing. It makes it much harder to work with. So I don't want that first number to be negative. So I don't want to create habits now that will make it confusing later. Okay, so it's not wrong to have a negative 4p squared, but I don't want you to do that because it'll be confusing later, okay? So what we're going to do, we want everything to one side. So I want to keep that p squared or the x squared or k squared, whatever it is. I want this to be positive. So we're going to leave that there. That means we're going to move the p over to the other side. And when we say we're going to move it to the other side, we mean we're going to do the opposite. We're going to, instead of having minus p, we're going to add p to both sides of the equation. Okay? When we add to both sides, we have 4p squared plus p equals 3, and then these are going to cancel out. Okay? Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to subtract 3 from both sides of the equation to get that 3 to the other side. We do the opposite. So now we have 4p squared plus p minus 3 equals 0. All of this just to get to the point that we can use the quadratic formula.
Murray?
Yes?
Can I please see Mark Thompson for one moment?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're ready to use the quadratic formula. Make sure you tuck your shirt in before you go down there. Okay, so now let's do our quadratic formula. It says x equals, well, in this case, it's p. Okay, it doesn't matter if it's an x or a p. Negative b. So what's b equal to in this example? 1. b is 1. Okay, so we've got negative 1 plus or minus the square root of b squared. So that's 1 squared minus 4 times a. What's a? 4. C? Negative 3, right? C is negative 3. All over 2 times a, which is 4. So we have negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 1. Okay, now look, we have a negative 4 times a negative 3. That's going to give me a positive. So it's going to be plus 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 4 is 48. All over 8. Right? So that is negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 49 over 8, which gives me negative 1 plus or minus 7 over 8. So now that I got to that point, now I'm ready to separate these. This will be negative 1 plus 7 over 8 and negative 1 minus 7 over 8. So we have 6 over 8, which is 3 over 4. And we have negative 8 over 8, which is negative 1. And we're done. Okay, so a lot of times, like the problems on this worksheet, we have to do a lot of work before we can even start using the quadratic formula, right? So all of this was just so that we can get it in the correct form to use a quadratic formula. Okay, let's look at number 2. Any questions on that one? Okay, let's look at number 2. Is this in the correct form? Is it in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0? No. So what do I do to put it in the correct form? Okay, so how do I do that? Okay, 6n squared. In order to move that minus 3n over, I have to do the opposite. So instead of minus 3n, it is plus 3n. Okay, we add 3n to both sides. Now I've got to move the 30 over. So what do I do to move that over? Subtract 30 from both sides. So we get 6n squared plus 3n minus 30 equals 0. Okay. Now we'll do our quadratic formula. N equals negative b. What's b? B is 3, so it's negative 3 plus or minus the square root of b squared. So that's going to be 3 squared minus 4 times a. What's a? 6 times c, negative 30, over 2 times a, which is 6. So we have negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 9. Again, I have a negative times a negative, so that's positive. Right? Let's see. 4 times 30 is 120 times 6, so that's 780. Is that right? That doesn't feel right. $180. Yeah, it's 720. 720, I think it is. I guess I should do that on the calculator to be careful. Huh? $720. Okay. Divided by 12. All right, so we get negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 729 over 12. So do we know the square root of 729? Okay. So this equals negative 3 plus or minus 27 over 12. So now what? Negative 3 plus 27 over 12. Negative 3 minus 27 over 12. So we get 24 over 12, which is 2. negative 30 over 12, which is negative 5 halves. So there's my solutions. Okay. Questions on that one? Okay, let's look at number 3. Mary, how would I start number 3? Okay, we got to put it in the right form. So what would my first step be to do that? Move everything to the left? Okay. Asen, how would I do that? Move everything to the left.
Minus on each side, so minus 10 on each side.
Okay, let's subtract 10 from each side. Good. So we have 4k squared minus 10 equals negative 6k. Now notice on your Delta Math assignment, when we moved things over, we had to combine like terms before we continued. Like on your Delta Math, there might have been a plus 3 over here, so we'd have to do 3 minus 10. So this one's easier because we don't have any like terms to worry about. Okay. Anna, what now?
Break over the negative 6k.
Okay, how do I bring it over?
You might subtract it from the side and add 6%.
Almost. We want to do the opposite.
Oh,
Add it, yeah. Add the 6k to both sides. Good. So we have 4k squared plus 6k minus 10 equals 0. Now we're in the correct form. Okay. So now we're going to use a quadratic formula. Okay, so we have, in this case, it's a k, not an x. So k equals negative b. Dominic, what's b? 6. So it's negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 6 squared minus 4 times 4 times negative 10 all over 2 times 4. So k equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 36. Is it going to be minus or plus? Plus. Why is it plus? Yeah, it's a negative and a negative. So plus, say 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 10 is 160 over 8. K equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 196, sorry. 196 over 8. Now we know the square root of 196, right? 14, good. Okay. So we have negative 6 plus 14 over 8 and negative 6 minus 14 over 8. That gives me 8 over 8, which is 1, and negative 20 over 8. Let's see, 4 goes into 25 times, and it goes into 8 2 times. There we are, 1 and negative 5 halves. Okay. Okay. So I need you all